Good afternoon, everybody. In the spirit of getting started on time and ending on time, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kosali Simon for today's AI workshop, practical application of large language models across stages of research. It's wonderful to see everyone here. I know our most participants are actually online, so we'll have to respect the fact that they outnumber us probably by a factor of 50. Yeah, this again. So last week we had 241 people online, which I thought was huge. And I think this week is not going to be any different. Kosali is a wonderful colleague. I'm not going to talk too much about her because if I start talking about her biography, we'll be here for an hour and then there will be no talk. But she is the co-lead of CTSI Informatics together with me. We've been doing this job for 2.5 years together, and it has been a wonderful experience. She's also the power behind the research data commons at IU. So she'll probably mention this a little bit. But the research data commons is the place at IU where you can find a catalog of the major data sets that we have, and it includes the INPC, and we have big plans for this. And obviously, how to work with data. The session today relates very much with that resource. So without further ado, Kosali, it's all yours.
Thanks very much. I'm delighted to be part of this series. I've learned a lot from watching the first one. And so I'm going to be making reference to the way in which this is such an evolving field that it's just a series of back and forths we're going to be having. And I'm here to, as much as anything, learn from you all. So I'm going to talk about the background of the research workflow and how it is, I think, as one example of a researcher, I will be interacting with AI, or I see the possibilities. And so that's going to be the main agenda item, is to think about research in just for convenience sake, 10 as a number of phases, and think of where AI might fit in. And but I'll start off with just some key themes that I think power all this. So it's a really exciting time for research and discovery. There are, and there have been over time, lots of phases at which new instruments are introduced. So starting off with a quote, and I want to ask for audience participation, any guess as to the era in which this statement was made? I wanted, of course, to seem like this researcher is talking about AI, but it was. It was a long time ago. But it's been this way with so many eras of what seem like transformational technical change, and in terms of what we have as instruments, as tools. And so think about when, any number of inventions, even more recent, we can think about how computers have evolved in a way that we were thinking, oh, how are we going to integrate this into our research workflow? The internet, any kind of tools. And so this is, and just to put that in context, we're going to be we're just dealing with another tool, and it is just fast evolving at a pace of innovation that is hard to keep up with, and is very good. So just as I said, just one person's view, one researcher, although thanks to many colleagues through whom I learn. And I am going to talk a little bit from the perspective of IU policy, and know that there are many universities at which people are at, and will be finding the relevant policies there. And I will also mention in what way the talk itself is using LLM, again, following Sean's lead on that great presentation last week. So please put suggestions into the chat, and also at the Q&A, or whenever you want to interrupt, I'm fine with that too. But I want to think of this as, and any of these types of talks are really just back and forth discussions, because we are trying to crowdsource and learn what is all there that there is. So I'm going to start off with some of the things I think of as the overarching themes when we grapple this question of how do we incorporate AI tools into our research workflow. First of all, what does use of AI mean? There are many data use agreements or agreements that we agree to in journals that talk about the use of AI. But there's not just one way in which we define the use of AI. Looking across many of these, it's clear it's not that the use of AI, for example, in spell checkers. So there's AI going on all over the places you don't even realize is AI, or is fuzzy area of whether we call it AI. But most agreements that are talking about the use of AI have to do with two key features, I think, is at the heart of what we have as concerns, which was the confidentiality and the safety of the information I am exchanging being compromised by the type of tool or the way I'm using. And the second key feature is about the extent to which I am portraying as mine the work that might be generated by machines in ways that we are coming to some common understandings, although evolving constantly, of what a profession means as the ethics. And we have experts in this series who are going to talk more about those elements. But just to give you an example of how AI was used in this slide, the bullets you're seeing there, the first two I just wrote. The third one, I first had as a draft some points, which I then looked at and said, that doesn't really look clear. So let me see what an LLM will help me improve as, and then I edited. And so of course it's, should I footnote that? That's sort of the evolving stance, so we're not sure, is what is the use of AI? On the theme of privacy, I'll point to some statements that are made even in policy documents, which I think is not keeping up with how fast privacy elements are being built in. And so it is not very transparent, or it's not a commonly there's not a common accepted view of how much privacy there is, but there's a lot of detail going into privacy preservation. So there's a review that was done in this source here that went across and tries to explain to people the degree to which at least the paid tiers of LLM interfaces are building in some tools, and as well as the university license versions. But there is this is also an evolving area where I think it's that we are going to constantly try and understand to what extent has there been confidentiality and privacy. And it is so much better than it used to be. And it's so much better than you might get when you're on the paid tiers than on the free tiers. Yes. Okay. All right. Right. Yes, I'm talking primarily about the way in which the information you might have on your desktop, on some other secure server, where you're thinking, oh, I want to be able to incorporate this information in a way. For example, I'll go into examples of coding, or beyond coding, just asking agents to do the coding and analysis for you, right, as a first draft. Well, you can't, you're going to be very careful doing that with HIPAA and other confidential forms of whatever protections are there, unless you really read what the rules are that are guiding that. But what if you are using public information? You still might be worried about, well, does this mean somebody else is going to get to the idea faster? Whatever it is, whatever your concerns are, there are going to be rules built in about what you can set as your settings or what's already in the legal agreement. And then you can also try and understand what is written there. Am I interpreting that correctly? So many of the paid versions, especially now, say, your information is not being used to train, it's not being retained. And so you want to try and understand from somebody how much is there of what levels of security that I should think about. So, sorry, just to say some very broad cross-cutting themes that come across, and you'll hear in lots of similar talks, are about, the art of the prompt, right? A lot of what we are discussing is about how we interact. Even if all we're doing is interacting through the chat window, which is only one of many ways we can interact, there is an art to it about the detailedness of the prompt, the iterating, the refinement, and so there's a lot of that. There's another layer of verification. However, that verification is being done, asking for sources, going and reading sources, making sure you can stand behind every word, right? And that's also part of the fourth bullet of taking responsibility for what you claim is your product. In what way are you the driver of it using a tool? I don't, when I use a computer, acknowledge the computer. Maybe initially there were some schools of thought about how you would have acknowledged that there was a tool helping you do this calculations, not just in your brain, right? We don't know how those will evolve. To what extent are we acknowledging where? But we definitely need to make sure we claim responsibility and then cite and acknowledge to the expectation of the current professional standards. But avoiding unintentional plagiarism is just one of the many human aspects of how we interact. It's not even just plagiarism. We have to be aware of how we might do. I know in the last presentation, I think it was Bill Tierney who talked about the copy and paste problems that might occur. Even that's not plagiarism, but that is an interaction of the human aspects into how we deal with how we're going to use it. What are we going to make sure we each time do these checks? Even if we agree and know and are not intentional about these, there are going to be many unintentional ways in which mistakes or problems can occur. So now, again, if you have not already watched the first series by Dr. Grenz, I highly, highly recommend it because I learned a ton from it, and I think it is just a great way to understand the power of these machines, where it's going. And so I will refer to a few things. I will also restate a few things from that, but I will start with just IU resources. Again, whatever university is relevant, know that there is going to be some place where it'll be listed and that there will be, again, fast evolving places. So the AI Academy, as Sean mentioned, there is a Canvas course, which so now I have taken, it is live now, and I have just finished taking some of the modules, and there I will go into showing what these modules are. And there'll be lots of things to keep building. It's already, whatever you'll see presented, even the examples I'm going to give some examples of what I taught in the spring semester course in undergraduate health economics. I already know that is all outdated, right? And so when I'm doing my prep for this coming semester, I know whatever I'll prep now, I'll keep saying, well, I'm not sure this, maybe not. How do we do this? What's the way we're going to keep prepping classes like this? And you have to be really, really very clear when you prep a class especially for very early stage learners. So for me, for undergraduates, I got to make sure everything is error-free when I'm introducing a new topic, or it just leads to a lot of confusion. So IU has these sites where you can go into looking at acceptable uses. And but then when you'll see, I'll go into asking, what can we do in a research process that uses an API, that uses deep research, and that uses an agent model? Well, what are the services I can now use at IU to do these things, and what can I do with data of different levels of security? This is just going to continue. So this is the front page of that Canvas site. If you go onto the IU Academy, IU AI Academy, there'll be a button to click now that takes you to this Canvas course. And when you're enrolled, this is what it'll look like. You can work through many modules. Some modules are aimed at teaching, some are aimed at citing research, but those are. And you'll see there are notes there. If you are an instructor wanting to use some of these modules, you can click there and then build that in. So if into a class you have as a homework, get to know the right ways to cite or something like that, you could be in there. So that's the Gen AI 101 course at IU. There are many notes there and elsewhere about the safe and ethical use. And I'm now going to go into lots of examples and possibilities, and this will be in the background as find out, learn about, figure out the level of comfort and in how you interact. So it's going to be just not, I won't keep bringing this up, but this will be everywhere, a theme there. Okay, so now I'll go into the 10 stages, and please do keep putting what you think as examples. So I created this graphic just thinking about what might be areas to talk about. And first is the initial stage of idea generation. What you might come up with as an idea because you have been reading papers, or you went to a conference or a presentation, or you happen to see a news article, or it's come from real world concerns. You were at some stakeholder meeting, you were at some agencies, and you realize there is a need. You're going to come up with that, identifying the gap, identifying the problem. And there are many ways that AI could help with this role, but one might be to treat it like a colleague. So you have to think again of how you trust your colleagues in talking about initial ideas, but you want to just have that hallway conversation. You want to also look at literature reviews. So those will all be part of this initial stage. So here's a prompt where I say, I want to start talking about a research topic. I don't say what it is. I say, I want to just engage on what it is. And then the large language model says, okay, I am going to shift into a collaborative researcher to researcher level. And now you might think, do I want to interact in an agent base, a more iterative? So you might want to choose what levels of the model you're going to use, or the way you're going to use the model. But that's, again, logical. If you want to preview this before you say, suppose I am an early stage career trainee and I want to go talk to my mentor about an idea, and I want to have really thought through the questions my mentor is going to ask me before I do, this might be a way to do that. If your hallway colleague is not available, for example, or you might want to do it in addition to, but this is a way you could be thinking about those. For literature reviews, now formally tracking the literature, there's a huge area of innovation of what's out there as tools. And so you could be summarizing articles. That's been there for a long time. But more and more of these tools do very sophisticated synthesizing, finding who's working, creating the networks of where is this research being done. So you know also where to go and see whether is there something on as new conference presentations, even if it's not in the published literature. How do you know what's going on? And so I've pointed to here a couple of resources. There's one you can see in the IU side. I've also pointed to an example from another university. Universities are going to have on their libraries pages or on their IT pages summaries of what are the versions that the university might have subscriptions to. Otherwise, you can go and get your personal subscriptions free or paid, but just know that there will be so many. There's easily 10 tools when people talk about the top 10 of what are doing literature reviews, and then it'll be maybe different in the next month. It's new features get added, but there's phenomenal amounts of work that you would have otherwise done through other means being now can be powered through AI. So literature reviews. I'm going to get now to the second stage, which is maybe formal, thinking more about your hypothesis. And so depending on the field, this is going to involve different types of science or forums. So I'm going to be talking mainly from the perspective of health services research, and specifically maybe within that more health economics. If you were studying protein structures, the way you would be thinking about this would be somewhat different. Maybe you might not be using the same tools I'm going to talk about, but somewhere there's this figuring the theory out. And so in economics, it might be trying to create a model of how behavioral responses happen, of thinking about objective functions and then putting them sometimes into math models. And so you could think of model visualization here. You can take equations, which just look like, I don't know, I have to really pay attention to which Greek letters are connecting this and that. But you can ask for a visual version that helps you really see the systems of equations, or you could simulate outcomes through them. So lots there in whatever field you're in. The third element, designing a study, depending on whether it's qualitative, quantitative, go in different areas. And I think that Dr. Patzer is going to be talking about qualitative analysis in the next one, is that right? So, but here are some examples of study design where you could be using AI, coming up with your IRB protocol, coming up with your data management plan, coming up with the design of the clinical trial. All of these are areas in which there exists resources. So I'll talk about one person's work that is about designing studies, Susan Athey, who is an economist at Stanford, and she talks a lot about the science of technology in research and using models. But even just designing the IRB. And so this is just a snapshot. I'm sorry, it's small font, but the slides will have all the links. So NIH has an item that says IRB review of research involving AI, and it is an example of how there are guidelines on how one should think about the IRB, so the design of the plan. What do you need to be telling your participants about if the information they're going to give you might use through AI tools? What if you don't know yet if this is data that's being collected and could be studied for years to come? What sort of statements would you need to make? Because you don't know right now what tools somebody might be using. Aside from the fact that you could be using AI to help draft your IRB protocols as well by looking at, here's all this information, put it into really understandable format as your draft, and then you take on the next stages. So Susan Athey, she has given talks on many topics related to AI in research, but one of the things I saw and really liked was how she is talking about how many places, so she consults for many large enterprises as well as the federal government in designing studies. And so about how you come up with A/B testing or whatever the forms will be. So that's an area, depending on the study design that your discipline or your subject area is going to, you're going to take it up. So also in thinking of how you're designing your study, especially when it comes to teamwork, there is a lot that ambient listening can do to help us in better team coordination, just like what, again, I'll refer back to the first presentation and Sean, your examples of how ambient listening in patient care is freeing up so much time of those delivering patient care. It doesn't stop there, right? It's that we in our enterprise of conducting research, there is so much that ambient listening can free up of time and make our processes more efficient because of the note-taking abilities and the meeting summary abilities that are built in. So you could be thinking about generating, organizing, sharing meeting notes in a way that much more clearly tags people as, okay, after the meeting, it was decided, this person was going to do this, what timeline was discussed, and then you get a project tracker updated or generated. These are tools that it's not yet quite automatic, at least at IU, because you have to be on the paid tier of Copilot to do this. There are some things you can do that are quasi-automatic with the free version. You can make sure, I think I've got some screenshots here, but you could, when you are scheduling a new event, go to meeting options, make sure you allow the transcribing feature. But if you want to set it as a default for all of your meetings, you have to have the Copilot app. The app is a $30 a month version on IU. And so you'd go and within the tools available in the AI Academy, you'll scroll down to the second one, which explains the differences between the free version and the paid version. And then there is a place you can click and go put in an IU account number, and then you get your Copilot app. Yes, Sean. There's yours.
Sorry. Hi. There's at least 5 AI summarization tools that people have turned on for this in the chat.
fantastic.
You can see.
Yes.
So
This is
clearly it's an evolving space.
Absolutely. And it is now, so IU should, I mean, any organization's got to think about what's guidance given to Fireflies, what's given to all the other AI agents that can join meetings that we are currently saying, not for that's, we don't have guidance for, but because right, there's, especially when these are options that not everyone will have access to at an organization, but it is fantastic, the abilities that are being generated, that you can tie your meeting notes to a OneDrive or Teams folder. And so you do not have to take that time. You might have spent a few minutes after each meeting, maybe more than a few minutes after each meeting, sort of getting your notes organized, not just organized for yourself, but emailing it out to people and telling people where it is stored and what the follow-ups are, and having you be the person who emails and prompts, okay, or you put it into your Trello or whatever. But these can now be automated. And again, there's a lot of human care that has to go in. For example, if I heard from somebody about how the default settings could be that the meeting notes go to everybody who was invited for the meeting. You have to be careful. What if the meeting didn't include them and there were things said without the understanding that they would get the meeting notes? You have to make sure everybody understands. These were the rules of how the meetings now operate. And if not, if there are aspects that you think then information might be discussed that is of a different nature, critical nature, you got to make sure those tools were authorized to be on those, or you turn those off when that element happens. Anyway, so those are some of the getting to that third item of research, coming up with the structure, setting up the team. Now, thinking about obtaining resources, a big thing on lots of people's minds might be, what are the federal funding agencies saying about the use of AI in how the application and the supporting materials are generated? And so, as you probably saw, there was about a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, was that last week? Announcement from NIH about the use of AI in research applications, as well as going along with the limiting the submissions per PI. But what you'll also see is that statement reiterated something about NIH peer review, which says, even though this, I think I might have it coming up later as a slide, but there was an iteration of how no AI can be used in the peer review process. And I've also compared to some other journals that are updating their peer review processes of how AI might be used, whereas others are saying no use. And then it's not clear what exactly does any use of AI mean there. So anyway, saying that there's a lot behind this. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail. Of course, this is just going to be an overview of topics on these. But that's going to be a big area to delve into, which is, given that statement from NIH, but given all of the proliferation of tools, what is the way we're going to interact in the assembling of resources, part of the life cycle of a research workflow? Okay, so now I'm going to talk about data collection, preparation, and also many of the tools here will apply to the sixth item, which is about data analysis. And here is where I have the most number of slides, but I'm going to really try fly through them because I don't want to get all into the details, but there's a huge amount of time saving and process possibilities here. So if we think about the options that are there, even just with the chat interface, so many things that can be done. But if we go into the deep research AI, API, agents area, there is then a lot more options depending on the type of data, type of analysis, and what you're going to be using. But as an example, if you are going to have the Copilot app, there is ability to use Copilot Studio, which is the agent version of Microsoft. And so what is it that an agent does versus a API versus just deep research? I cannot tell you all the differences because I think it is changing. It used to be that on deep research. So first, just to get into, there are many ways you can summarize, and here I have just a little summary, but you could just be asking any large language model, summarize for me what is available on the different interfaces and different models of how I can do deep research, API, and agents, as an example. And then you'll see, okay, you got to keep redoing that every few months because it'll keep changing. But think of it this way. I have just really interactive things I want to do. Think of it as you were coding interactively with your software, with Stata or whatever, you coding interactively. And now you've got a much bigger scale job that you want to do. It's going to take you too much of human effort to keep doing it. There isn't an efficient loop cycle in the chat interaction, but you can just send it through an API that says here. So you can go and create, get a API, instance to plug into your code and just interact that way. I've got tons of observations I want to run. I want you to do the same thing on. I'll go through an example of coding text. Suppose you've collected text and you want to do text analysis. And then here's where it'll be important to set the temperature, the concept that John talked about, to 0, because you need to have the same protocol on every line of your data. You can't say, oh, this line of text was translated by an agent that was, going in this direction versus that direction. They all have to be reproducible. So for reproducibility of research, when you're interacting in these ways, you have to set the temperature, I think, to 0 to make sure it's the same answer each way. Otherwise, somebody trying to reproduce your research is going to get a different answer because of the way the unpredictability of the way the large language models are operating. So, all right, I'll go into an example, I think, coming up. Again, same idea with analysis. You could be generating code by interactively asking, suppose I want to do this with my data. What would be the code you use? And you can then say, I've tried it. I'm getting this error. Ask it to debug. You could say, my colleague has this already programmed in SAS. I need to translate it into something else. Again, you'll use these as your first draft because you're not going to think that this is the perfect answer right away, right? So I'm going to give an example from an undergraduate class I teach where I am trying to have my students who will go into healthcare management and policy careers understand just the basics in order for them to interact with people who'll know more. So I have a few modules built in where in the past, I used to painstakingly have them understand how to download and install or find a library computer that has R. And we'd do a tiny little example, and I wouldn't try to do more than R. And then I would say, oh, now it's becoming easier. Let's try compare R and something else. And now I'll say, you could just do this all so fast, just within a 1-week module. You could learn so much. You could use many tools that now have you not interact. So this was in April that I taught this particular module. And even by the time I was done with that week, I was starting to tell, all those things I told you that I thought on Monday or whatever was the way to do it. I'm now discovering you can actually interact through text. Gemini allows you don't even have to say, to type what you want to do. You just speak what you want and it will generate the code and have you test it. So I don't know what I'm going to teach when the students arrive. I just don't know what to tell them. But as an example of a use case, I said, suppose you are going to be working in a company where you're going to get data on orders that are being filled for medical device products. And I would say, remember, you're going to be very careful about your company's policies before you interact with any of these tools. But even if your company says you cannot, that we are not going to be using those, know that you could always learn based on simulated data. So you could say, okay, I'm not going to actually upload the orders, but I know there's enough non-confidential information about the fact that an order has a date, the order was placed, a product code or something. I'm not going to use real product codes, but I'm just going to put something in and just think through the process. So you could say, suppose we have 3, data tables in the company: customers, products, orders. And suppose what your use case is that there's a product that's going to get recalled and you need to know how to contact each of the customers who bought those. You need to know how to generate a list of contact information. And then that's going to be your small task. How are you going to do that with this? Suppose you need to understand how this happens if you're going to be overseeing it, even if you're not the person actually coding it. So I give sort of a synthesized example, and this was when I was pointing things in class. I would say, suppose these are the 3 different tables, and remember, you're going to try to look for the keys that join these, right? So you're going to look for the foreign keys that are the joiners between and cross-reference between the tables. And then now you understand it. You want to know, how would this be done if it wasn't just 5 customers in an Excel spreadsheet that I could quickly understand? And I'd say, here's an example. You can ask a chat model to just give you the code that would, once you describe, you say, I have 3 tables that have these features. Or you create your fake little CSV Excel files that look like these tables, you upload them, and you say, here's what I want to do. Can you generate me code in whatever language that does these? And so you can then ask, oh, what does that first line do? So that's a way for you to learn the code by saying, you generated it for me. Now I'm looking at it. I see you're saying, call these pandas, whatever. What does that mean? You can learn that way rather than if somebody doesn't have the time to sign up for a whole class that's going to go from scratch. Like, use the use case as the way you learn, right? And so I would say, simulate data, learn about it, find the task, and the aim here is to just upload the simulated files, look through the code that's generated, and then go back and forth, understand what that is. And this is where I change from saying, oh, but you can then go to this tool called Colab, which is available for educational coding. You don't even have to have downloaded on your machine having R work. You can have it on, you can just log on within Google to this tool and have it all open there. You don't even have to think of notebooks. And so you can have your storage folder, your notes document, and think of that as the workflow, and test out many things. And then remember, the aim for my class was simply to get students to a point where they can say, I know enough now that I can help oversee or can talk to people who are doing this. So that's my small example from which you can think of many ways to broaden this to when you're doing coding for research. So APIs, what is a way that you might want to use more than just the chat interface? If you've got a lot of code, a lot of text, you might want to just have it be automatically set up that this is going to happen every time it's updated. And I also wanted to put a note here about the real LLMs, the API series, which I think Sean mentioned a little bit, and it's something that in the fall IU will have more on, but there will be, I think, piloting ones that can handle HIPAA protected data and more more functionalities there. So if you're saying, I'm done with the learning curve of doing it on simulated data or public data, I really need to do it on my actual data now, there are tools to stay up on. And here's just, if you were using OpenAI, this is the way you would get API key and put it somewhere into your code. If you're using Copilot Studio, you'd log into somewhere else. I think I don't know if I have it. But, suppose I am, an example would be, suppose I have free text from Reddit posts that are commenting on something related to the opioid crisis. Suppose it's about I want to understand sentiment expressed in posts that relate to illicit substances. I might, because it is public data, be able to get from Reddit a large file, upload it into, it would be a file with free text, and then I would give it, have it in my code asked to do sentiment analysis of, is it expressing this sentiment or that? So that's one where I wouldn't want to paste each into the chat. I would want to do this through a code, and I would want to do it in a reproducible way. All right, so I am going to go over the next few ones maybe more quickly because these are probably more well-known that you can find. So many tools that help with the drafting, editing, summarizing. But I want to mention one example of something I hadn't thought about, but is part of the writing support. So suppose you have your writing tools that you use, for example, Overleaf. It's a great collaborative writing tool for scientific writing. And there isn't currently any AI plugins for Overleaf. But it doesn't mean that you can't use AI in helping you write in Overleaf, because you could do the following, like real world examples of things I come up with. I get compile errors all the time and I have no idea where to go and fix. I now can just put that error in and say, what's going wrong? What if I have a regression, an equation I want it to now put into the manuscript? I can just ask for that in LaTeX code. So lots of things that are, even if an AI tool is not built into, you can say, this is how I was doing it. I'm just going to help have this as a, like the person next door, I would go and keep bugging and say, you know Overleaf better than I do. Would you mind looking at my error or something? So another way in which you might, I hadn't thought about, but I'm seeing this as a way to use AI, is to think about how before you send a manuscript out for review, you might want to have had a colleague read over really carefully and say, act like reviewer number 2, act like a reviewer who's really going to point out things I'm not doing, right? And you can ask the LLM to act like a reviewer for journal X and say, give me the what are the things you really think I haven't paid attention to that reviewers, given what you can learn, would say. Again, you're going to do this under a model you trust and feel this is okay with, but a study that I'm citing over here compared what authors who were given both a human-generated review and a machine-generated review thought about the machine-generated review. Many thought the machine-generated review was more helpful or whatever. There's a spectrum. So that's a way in which in the writing stage, you might interact with AI tools. That's not the actual writing, but it's the feedback on, did I do it? That too is one where, again, we'd have to be very, like, if the rules of how whatever funding agency you're interacting with allow certain tools, that's another form of review that might be used. So there's, in thinking about AI in peer review, there's of course the concern we're seeing from journals about people sending reviews in that appear not to be reviews in the sense of you read it and you thought about it, but that it could be somebody has uploaded the manuscript, asked an LLM to conduct a review. So there are several things about this that are, sort of interesting, I think. One is that some journals are trying to say, okay, we're not going to now just say this is completely forbidden. We're going to think about how to build this in. And so we're going to try and get services that work with our own journal to do a first round review that is by a machine. And then that is available to the reviewers as you don't have to worry about that. You didn't have to do the, pointing out these simple things. Here's the first review. So know that that is already done. We want you to really focus on the kind of things the machine can't do. So those are evolving fields of how research in the peer review stage is thinking about this. This is the note that I wanted to point to. So NIH in its July 31st notice about use of AI in applications said, we want to remind people of the 2023 rules about peer review. They stand as is. And so it says prohibited to upload or share content online. However, it doesn't say, for example, suppose I've come up with a comment. I might say something like, this would be innovative, except had the authors, PIs, read the 3 other studies like this that are identical to it, but I want to put it into a tone that's more respectful and supportive. How might I word this? There's nothing confidential about that. I could still be using, I don't see this rule as prohibiting me from thinking about how to soften or more appropriate language. There's also an exception for assistive technology. So again, to be aware of, it's building in if assistive technologies are needed for some reason, they are built in. Dissemination and implementation, many things here too. I'm just gonna, I know we're running against time, so I'll just put these on the slides. You could be thinking about suggesting of course, condensing, writing, did I have enough details in my notes to make this replicable? Is there and literally in translating just the word translate into a different language. You could be doing that. There is in the IU suite of services, the Notebook LM, which can take a presentation and turn it into a podcast. So that's another way of thinking about disseminating work and translating, right? So in translating, I think yes, exactly. Archiving, data sharing, many ways you could be asking the LLM to help you create the replication package, turn this into a GitHub entry, turn this into the archive entry that's going into ICPSR, give it enough information. I want to have the scripts and the publicly available data and the figures folder, make it so that it is really easy to use when I'm archived and set. And so I think I'm at probably my last slide, which is just, it's a tool. It'll change. It's changing not just what we do research on, but how we do research. And any organizations that will invest, like the organizations that are doing these series in thinking of how to critically engage while paying attention to all the things your profession wants you to, this is going to be, there's a lot to be gained. And a philosophy of how to think about this while being very cautious and thinking about how to keep the human in all this, right? It's going to be where is it that we got to keep remembering the human tendencies that are going to make this not work like textbook like it should, and that it will just all keep updating frequently. So putting in a plug here for the rest in the series, and that's all.
Great tour de force of the research process. So thank you for staying at a high level. Every one of your topics could be exploded into another workshop, really, and we'll do that probably with most of your topics over the next year. I have one general question before we go to everybody else's question. When you talked about hypothesis generation and the hallway conversation that you have with fellow researchers or your mentor, I was thinking, at what point does that interaction with fellow humans become superfluous? Because if you think of LLMs, we're like, John, you're here. they could be better mentors than mentors. You know, an LLM can summarize the literature more comprehensively than you and I can at a moment's notice. It probably will have more constructive input on some of the worse ideas. So where's the boundary between us as, humans and the LLM in terms of conceptualizing research?
Great question. I think we're being pushed by all these tools to think about what do I do better than the machine? And what are the things that I used to spend time on, which if I'm comfortable saying, okay, I now don't need, that doesn't need to take up space. What else do we want to innovate to? And so everybody is strapped for time. If the interactions you're having with your mentor are only, half an hour, and earlier 20 minutes of that was going to be addressing things you think, oh, yes, I should have done. That allows you to have time for more of the more explorative and formative things that they're always going to be. Fingers crossed, and, at least we all think, right, that there are things humans are doing better. We just have to be better at articulating and making sure we focus on those things.
Yes, it will be a journey. Other questions from in the room, and I will handle the online questions.
Titus.
So I was interested in your discussion of basically turning over peer review to LLMs. Because as I think about it, basically we're ceding control over what the peer should be thinking about this field to a computer. And all of that's going to be very biased by what people have done in the past. So if the whole purpose of research is to push forward, are LLMs, or explain to me how LLMs are capable of doing that piece of innovating and thinking creatively. And it frankly just makes me nervous. And there's another whole component, like a secondary question that I guess a question to you and to everybody is, I still feel like whenever I use AI, and I don't use it for creative processes, I still feel like I'm cheating. Do I need to just get over that? Because I feel like your lecture has moved far beyond that, and it just assumes that everybody is using it. So 2 questions.
Great.
there.
All right. So though I'm sorry if I stated anything about peer review being taken over by machines. I simply wanted to show what ways journals are discussing peer review. But what I thought of as, yes. Right. Yes. No. So again, I think of, if I want to send a journal to peer review and I want to make sure it doesn't get dinged on the most obvious things I didn't think about, that I might want to have asked a peer that is not my peer reviewer, but my close colleague, can you please tell me what are some really, like on a first cut, some very obvious things that these machines, as you saw in Sean's presentation, have an IQ rating that is now at the forefront and beyond average human IQs, right? So this is a smart colleague. I can't think of it any longer as a colleague who just regurgitated something to me. We have to start thinking about these machines as they're not humans, but they have trained on a vast amount of information, and we're going to be pressed to consider ways in which they're going to give us advice that we might want to take note of with the grain of much salt that this is coming from a machine, and we're going to use our human judgment that way, but that could be a way. And that, again, it's not my words. I'm, as you said, reflecting what I see as discussions that are going on. I'm simply reflecting on, and I would love to have seen, and this is what I meant to look into, when computers were first being used, what was societal sentiment about what we should be allowing a computer? I feel these same qualms. I don't want to not be the generator of the first draft, because I feel like that's going to be or a first draft of an email even. I want to type out all my emails myself, because I'm afraid that is a skill I will otherwise not have. But is that a skill that in the long run, I got to think it's kind of an undervalued skill? Like my ability to add the 10 numbers in my mind or something is not where I'm putting a lot of my effort, not because I think that is. So I don't know. It's all things for us to consider. Sean.
Actually, I'd love to hear Sean's viewpoint because we know that he has AI draft all his emails.
Yeah, so I do have a question, but a bit of a response. Thinking analogically, when general contractors become general contractors, they don't just magically turn into that. They've been an electrician, they've been a carpenter, they've been something. They know what these people are doing, and they can look at a plan and say, I need X, Y, and Z done, not because I don't want to do it or I want to cheat or skip things. It's that I have a lot of knowledge. I'm a very busy person. I have many plans to put together, and I can save time by having this put together. And then I can review using my knowledge, my deep experience to come back and leverage that content production. And I think that is one of the ways I am nervous along with you. And I periodically ask myself, is my use of AI causing my skills to decay? And so I'm very concerned about that. But at the same time, I also think about the 52,000 things I need to get done in a day. And if I can save 30 seconds on each of the 150 emails that I have to send a day, that's a huge time savings for me. And so there's a return on the investment of using AI that absolutely needs to be done in the context of being skeptical and aware. I said in my talk, I worry about people who aren't curious. If you're not curious, it is easy to give up your thinking faculty, your exploratory faculty, because I do think that it's easy to get away with things with AI, and that cause your skills to decay. So you are right to raise these questions, and you'll notice that neither Kosali nor I gave you a definitive answer on this, right? So my question to you, Kosali, is a completely different subject. As you talk about coding, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about when we teach people to code, a topic area that we all have historically almost always ignored. Titus is going to love this because I know he likes this area. Testing, building tests for your software. So I think I wonder, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, I wonder if as we move forward, we're going to tell AI what to do and give it the test to prove it did what it's supposed to. So all of the theory and the approach and processes for software testing, I think, is going to become increasingly important. That's just again, and I'm curious to hear your opinion about that.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. That point about verify, remember we say always, whatever the output is, go verify. That step itself takes a lot of time because you're thinking, I'm going to now take it off and put it onto my own instance of that software and try it myself. But there could be some of that that's given over to, okay, test and generating the smart way to test will be a new skill that I think people will be developing.
Yeah, 3 cheers for test-driven development. Next question. And while I'm walking, how reliable is it when you tell an LLM not to use your input for training itself? I tend to distrust technology, but do they all follow that instruction when you give it in the prompt?
So that's where I would say the report that I referenced at the start went into all of the user agreements. And I think it is that these are not small companies. These are very visible companies, and that there is an understanding about what that is. But going back again to another one of Sean's great points, get to be friends with somebody who's a computer scientist as well as a data privacy expert and tell me, can I really rely on all these things I'm hearing? It sounds like that's so, but interpret it for me.
That's something that I a lot when I'm doing research. But my question is that how do you test one model against another to make sure that if I ask something like that, it's not going to give me something that is a very biased answer, or like how do I still keep like when my question in the first place is to further my understanding, how do I keep a neutral how do I balance the response and not get biased by the response and know that there might be other things that even AI is not mentioning, right? So yeah, how do I test and how do I find a model that I can truly trust with asking questions like this?
Great. I would say it's in that same way that if I was asking a series of colleagues for feedback, I would know that I should be asking a broad set, and then also doing if it's a really important decision, then going and doing that extra part of talking with somebody. For example, if I am thinking of a decision in the research area, thinking about like, should I come up for tenure this year? Not that I would ask an LLM this question, but this is what we would ask colleagues, right? Different people might have different opinions, and I want to make sure I really investigate it carefully. If it is that I'm asking an LLM something like, should I code this as a double loop or not? Whatever opinions. I might just say, okay, stakes are low, let me try it out. Or stakes are high, I better really, really think about the fact that every source will have its own perspective and bias.
Last question.
To that vein, I mean, we know that some of these resources hallucinate. When should we directly be asking them if they're lying to us?
Great question, which is just always be thinking about, so in your prompt setting, like you can be training any of these models to say, whenever I'm asking you a question, make sure you are giving a citation, okay? But then you have to go to the trouble. The citations might be provided, but then are fake. So you'll go and check. And then there might be other ways that come up of how to have built-in testing so that you're not just going and testing it yourself.
Yeah, I've actually done that. Hallucinate, make it real references. When you know the literature, you actually recognize, yeah, these are real papers. So it okay, wonderful. We're at time. Thank you, Kosali, so much. This was great.
Much, everybody.
Please give
Good
Kosali another round of applause. I love the interaction, and thank you for all your questions and interest. To just make sure everybody knows, all the presentations, the slides, the supporting materials will be on the webpage that Medina is managing, so you will find everything there. In September, we have Peter Schwartz talking about ethics, so another really big topic in this area. I unfortunately will be remote in Germany, so Sean has graciously agreed to moderate that session. Thank you ahead of time, and thanks for coming, and have a good day.